Okay, everybody, thanks for being patient. We just gave a couple minutes for people to pop on, but we'll start right now. Again, my name is Brad Matsuga. I'm the Product Marketing Manager here at Blueprint. And thank you again for joining today's webinar. We're going to talk about managing requirements through the life cycle of an Agile project. Just some housekeeping things as you can see on the screen. We'll be doing it through the GoToWebinar, and then the audio is also through your computer as well. So what I like to do first is just kind of level set with everybody of what we're going to do. As we mentioned kind of in the description, we're really concentrating on companies that are going through complex enterprise-sized IT projects and working through the Agile practice as well as the requirements management piece and how they can really work together and complement each other. And we're looking for very large projects. So when we talk about them, we want to make sure that they have teams that are very large or they're distributed across the world. So if you have locations in the UK, in North America, in Asia, where these teams are working together. And also where a domain is extremely complicated or a very technically complex project. And so if you were kind of in that boat and that's kind of in your wheelhouse, then this is probably a good seminar for you. But if you're looking for maybe a smaller 10-person team and you're doing very agile things with stickies, this may not be exactly what you're looking for. So what we'll do today is actually go through kind of different phases and how we'll address some of these questions here on why we need to analyze the full business, how we're going to do it, why we believe, and our customers are telling us that the alignment between requirements management and Agile is really helping them and benefiting them, and also the reasoning why we need to have that kind of institutional memory of keeping all those requirements and information throughout the life cycle of the project. So what we're going to do is look through the life cycle kind of before, during, and after, and then we'll be able to address a number of these concerns that we're talking about. And at the end of the day, what we believe is that if we're able to do that, you'll be able to de-risk and accelerate your projects and really benefit the company and your organization as a whole. So what we see today, the environment that our customers or yourselves are in are kind of split into two, and we'll start at the bottom, where we have this Agile practice that you are either transitioning to, so some of you may be just starting to use and implement Agile in some departments, or some of you may actually already be there and have a good foundation of your Agile development practice. In either one of these instances, we're seeing that, again, there's the focus on moving forward and just providing enough information. We're producing a good quality product on a regular basis. We're going through a 2 or 3 week sprint process. And these things are starting to come together and really develop. But one of the challenges that we're seeing is that at the top in the business need is that the business is also in an environment which is constantly changing, but we need to adapt in order to support that Agile practice. And some of those kind of areas that we're seeing change, as you can see listed here, are first and foremost regulations and audits. So many of you may be in a highly regulated industry, whether it be banking or insurance or maybe healthcare. And what we're seeing is that the business is going to need to have to adapt, whether it be through more scrutiny from the government, or an example being, after the market crash in 2011, there's a lot more regulations to adhere to, and there's still that need from the business to really make sure that they're compliant. But at the same time, it has a spillover effect into that Agile development to make sure we're both supporting that business need and then the Agile practice at the same time. Another example would be some type of institutional memory, as you mentioned before. We need to make sure that the requirements persist throughout the life cycle of that project and even beyond. What happens again in Agile teams, they'll be working together perhaps for one project, and after that project is complete, then they're off to the next one and maybe even off to another company. But the organization still needs to retain that information, and the question is, how do they do that if they have to go back 2 or 3 years to find out why did we do this? And then there's one thing that we talk about where we talk about non-functional requirements. So these would be not just what does the product do or what does that project going to accomplish, but in what way or how well is it going to do it. So what is the performance metrics that we're going to meet? Or what are some security ones? Or what is the UI? What is the user experience throughout there? Which may not have an exact technical requirement, but still need to be taken into consideration when we're working on these IT projects. And what we're seeing is as we're transitioning to Agile, that gap in between the business and the Agile practice is widening. And what we need to do is try to align the two. And the way we see that we can do this is, again, through requirements management. But again, how can we address requirements in this Agile world in comparison to perhaps how requirements were done in the past? So what we like to do is kind of give a visual depiction on what does it really look like in the world of requirements management and Agile. Now, it's a busy slide, but we'll work through this, so don't worry too much about it. But we start from the bottom again, and that gray area is that kind of Agile practice where you have your product backlogs, you have a number of different iterations and sprints, you're going through the updating and refining, and that is that kind of core developmental progress which you're either moving towards or you already have in practice. And what we believe on the top in that blue area is where requirements management really fits into an enterprise Agile kind of development phase. And we split them up kind of from the beginning to the end, where you have at the very beginning gathering some analysis, then you go into the development phase, and at the end you move it on to production or operations. And we really think this picture is a good way to depict how requirements management and Agile can work really well together. So what we'll do first is we'll go through the phases, and we'll concentrate on really that first phase when we're talking about really the concepts in an Agile practice. So when we think of the very, very beginning of a project, what we're not trying to say is go back to the old practice of saying that, we need to create a 40-page document, it's going to take us 8 months to do, and we need all these signups. That's not what we're saying at all. And what we really need to do is take some of that work that we did before, but shorten it down and pare it down so we can really support that Agile practice. Because again, as the Agile people will say, is that we just need enough to get started. We don't need every single requirement down to the level of detail as we did before, but we still need some guidance in how much work is that. And what a lot of people are doing, and a lot of our customers are saying, is they're doing a domain or an enterprise analysis. They're really doing a high-level investigation on what do we need to do and understanding the areas of concerns. So if you're going through this process, you really need to understand all the stakeholders in there. And a good example, let's go back to again, let's say an insurance industry. You may have to have involvement with the finance department, maybe the risk department, maybe the actuaries need to be involved in this complex project. Legal, how about the customers? And at the end of the day, also those users, which again, the Agile practice, it's very important and fully support. We need to have those users in there. But we can't necessarily just isolate on them because we have so many different stakeholders that need to have input into the very beginning of that process. And what we'll get out of this enterprise or domain analysis is really a high-level understanding of the business rules and maybe even some very general requirements that what we can do is then pass it on to the Agile practice and then really have them start and really support them in the way and the philosophy that they're going through the development. So as we mentioned, you'll talk to business, we'll go through some of those non-functional requirements that we talked about, maybe go to finance and see some of those regulatory items that we need to go through, and also legal and PM and maybe some executive sponsors. And those are by no means the exhaustive list. There could be a far number of stakeholders that we need to involve. And then we talked about taking advantage of that institutional memory. If you really do have a good library, or we're seeing companies go to a center of excellence, where you can actually have a repository of information, you can learn from your coworkers or co-departments. Again, when we talk about companies that are very large and have distributed teams, maybe there's a project that's happening in North America that is a similar project that has been done a year ago in Europe. And what we can do is really de-risk and accelerate that project because we're learning from past pitfalls. We want to make sure that we're not falling into the same problems. Even though they may not exactly be the same, you can ensure that, oh, there's some regulatory concerns. Did we even think about that as a broad general concept? And the other part too is that, as most of your experience, when we talk about collaboration in different departments, as much as we do not want a 30-page document, handwritten approvals, I think we can all agree that in some of our industries, you're still going to need some type of review or approval process. Again, we're not saying go to this person and get them to sign with their pen and paper, but some of these requirements management tools are able to do formal reviews, which again, for a multi-million-dollar project, you have a $20 million budget, and an email approval is probably not going to be enough. So some type of formal review will be needed in there. But once we get into the next phases, the requirements management tool can also support you in some of those informal reviews, where you don't need formal sign-offs on, do we need to change this requirement? So as we look at this conceptual phase, those are kind of the things that we need to address in order to really support the Agile practice and get them to buy in and working together with the business at the same time. So the next phase that we kind of talk about is really that inception and construction phase. So we now have these high-level requirements. We've fed them into the requirements tool, and now we're working closely with the Agile and development practice. And what they need to be doing is that we are benefiting from the changes that are going to happen through iteration 0, iteration n, n+1, n+2. And what requirements management tool can do is really work in collaboration with the Agile practice to update, add, or refine these requirements. Again, the entire philosophy is providing them with enough information that they need to produce that next sprint or next sprint's worth of work, but not giving them everything in the kitchen sink so that they're overloaded and slowing them down. And the great part is that, you know, requirements are an evolution. So your initial requirement at iteration 0 may go through a number of different changes throughout the life cycle of that Agile development process. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a security requirement, which is a password. And does the password need to be 6 or 8 characters long? Maybe in the first iteration we say it's 6 to 8. And then we go through another sprint, and you know what? There's some changes and we'd like to adapt it and we need to be able to adjust. So we'll update the requirement, and then the next sprint it's going to be 12, and also we're going to add in, you need to be able to star out that password. And let's say in further iterations, more information comes through, and we're working together, collaborating, maybe it's technically not possible, we need to change it again, but that entire evolution and story of that requirement is being able to be maintained in that requirements management tool. Now on top of that, when we talk about, it's really about supporting the Agile practice. And again, the philosophy of being able to collaborate together. So you can have the business in there, you can have the legal department, and working within an environment where they're very comfortable. And technology has allowed us now to keep kind of that blue area on top, that requirements management tool, being able to synchronize it with that Agile practice down below in the gray area, and still have them in 2 different environments where they're going to be very comfortable. Okay? And when we talk about collaboration, we don't necessarily want to put someone in an environment where they're not going to be as productive. We want to put them in a tool or an environment where they're more suited to their day-to-day functions. So for example, if you have your business analysis, they're going to be more comfortable within a tool that is not focused on a development tool. So if we go back in the bottom here, we can use Jira, we can use Rally, we can use version 1, all those Agile ALM tools, and at the same time synchronize that through an integration engine where you can have a requirements management tool at the top where you're going to have the business people, the legal people, the finance people, and you can keep those pieces in there. And on top of that, you can actually keep your technical requirements in the top as well. Because of the synchronization between the Agile practice and the requirements management piece, you can keep that repository of information in the requirements management tool, and you can have the mix of your technical requirements, your functional requirements, your non-functional requirements, so you don't have to bounce back and forth between different tools in order to really go through all of those requirements. In line with that, when we talk about that traceability piece, is that you need to keep that story or that evolution of the requirement, which gives you that history, and also you can do some analytics. We also mentioned in the future you may be using this information in the requirements management tool for future projects. And that will be, again, that learning and that institutional memory, and one of the benefits and how you can really use requirements management in an agile practice. And as we mentioned as well, the cohesion between the requirements management solution and the agile tools really enhances that agile practice. We're supporting the giving enough information in time. We're supporting the concept of there needs to be constant communication with the customer to make sure what they're doing is really what the customer wants. And what it enables it to do is that it aligns that business practice with the development practice to make sure that you're reducing the amount of rework. If you have the communication between each other and then the informal reviews, you can ensure that they're aligned together and working towards that end goal of producing the best quality product at the end of the day. And that's really what this is about when we talk about that inception and construction phase. Then when we talk about at the very end, we've completed development, we have some great work between the agile practice, the business practice, we've worked together, the integration engine is there, we're synchronized, we have now produced a product or a project at the very end, and really what happens to it. We really have to think about at the end of a project, we're really delivering to the operations and saying, here you go, maybe some more testing, but for the most part, the development is complete, and that team is going to move on to the next project. They're going to say, okay, we're done here, great, now we're going to move on to the next version of it, maybe next on to a different project, a different area. But what we need to understand is that we still need to have that memory of the requirements and why we did these things and figure out why did it survive. Again, in a very traditional, agile, maybe a small shop practice, you complete your project and then all the user stories and all the requirements are kind of just left aside and you don't use them anymore. A good analogy to this would be that, let's say you bought a house, a new build house, and you have gotten completed, they give you the keys, they also give you the blueprints for your house. Now, realistically, you're not going to take those blueprints or throw them away or burn them. You're going to keep them around. Because maybe in a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, you may want to do some renovations. You're going to want to make sure, well, is that wall, can we actually take out that wall? Or really, where's the wiring in this house? Why did they actually wire it this way? Or where's the plumbing? Can I actually put another bathroom in there? And you need to have those blueprints of the house in order to really benefit you in the future. And you don't know. You may not need it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, but you still need to keep that information to benefit you in the future. And what that will do is that, again, this is the reason why we need those reasons to survive the project after it's completed. When we think about these projects, again, in a very large, complex IT world with distributed teams, global ones, we have very teams in different areas of the world, the amount of time that's spent on the development is probably a small portion of the actual lifespan and how long that project's going to be. Again, we'll take an example in the banking industry. If you have some type of core banking functionality software, you may develop it, but it will last another 10, 15 years. And some of those people, maybe with the company that worked on it, maybe they're moved on, but we need to be able to use that evolution of those requirements to go back and saying, you know what, why did we actually do this? How is this going to have an impact on us if we change it? Because since it is a core functionality, you can't take that risk to just, you know what, I think we can change this and have it bring down the entire system. It's a risk that you can't have, and the reasoning why this requirements management tool or that centralized repository really supports that agile practice, because we need to keep all that information within that tool for a future project. And that's in line with, again, the institutional memory. Why does it need to persist throughout the entire? We talk about governance and audits. we may do, as we said, some of us out there in very regulated industries will do this project today. 3 years, 5 years down the road, we're going to have to actually perform an audit and say that we're compliant with it. And we need to make sure that whether it's a package application or a web app or we're doing some type of legacy modernization, that we have that detailed information in order to support the business needs. Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to pass that audit so we can continue to evolve the business. And some of the things are very, very critical to the business itself, because there are some real financial implications if you don't meet that audit. And I'm sure I don't really need to tell everybody about that because you live and breathe that every day. So just to summarize as we go through again, we have requirements management. And we talked about kind of those 3 reasons, or 3 of the reasons why we're looking through. We look at the beginning in that inception phase. We really need to do that analysis, and the best practice of it's got to be a very high-level introduction to it. We're not saying you're going back to big requirements up front, but you need to have that information and understand the areas of concern so that that can really support and start that agile practice as we go along. We then get into the iteration 0 to iteration n, kind of that construction and inception phase. And again, that integration and synchronization between the requirements management tool and the agile practice. We can't just isolate one or the other. It's really about how they can work together and integrate with each other, but at the same time supporting that practice of giving them enough information as they need, being able to be flexible and adapt to that change. And really there's technology which has enabled us to do that. And it really keeps that evolution of the story of the requirements. The requirements will start at iteration 0 and be completely different by iteration n, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we need to also determine and make sure we understand why its story had changed throughout the entire life cycle and the agile development process. And at the end, we talk about shifting out to operations. We want to make sure that that why survives the life cycle of that project, because you don't know in the future, whether it be for an audit reason, maybe even for a change request reason. We need to understand the reasonings and have that repository of information that we can always go back to. And then at the end of the day, it also supports the Center of Excellence or the institutional memory, which you'll take back to the next project at, again, the beginning of this process. So almost the output of one project right here will then feed into and hopefully help de-risk and accelerate the project that's next down the line, whether it be next month, next year, or next decade. And that is kind of the end of the meat of what we're talking about here. Again, we're kind of almost at the end of time. Again, I'd like to thank you for joining our presentation. If you have any more information or questions, by all means, my contact information is up there. We do have on our website some interesting interviews with Alistair Coburn and Dean Leffingwell. They give kind of their thoughts on our blog of Business of IT. There's also a short survey at the end of this webinar as well. Help us kind of answer some questions and give us some insights here and there. But hopefully we've been able to really give you an understanding of where we see ourselves, or we see the market and the customers are telling us how to really deal with requirements management and how it can really benefit people in the agile practice and some of the things that they're doing in order to help out. So I know we're just about done. I'm going to give you back 4 minutes. I know if there are some questions out there, and I'll reach out to you directly. But again, thank you for joining, and I'll give you 4 minutes back into your day. Thank you very much.